Powell Lexing, and welcome to the Carol Powell Lexing Show. My mission is to empower you and enlighten you with knowledge from my 30 plus years of experience in the legal profession. I have been in the legal profession and basically boots on the ground in the trenches for over 30 years. So it's a pleasure to be here today. And normally before I start, I like to give an affirmation. And my affirmation today is for you to love yourself and remember all that glitters is not gold. Today, we're going to dive into a topic I'm sure that everyone is familiar with, and I have a special guest with me today. I'm excited about this guest. He's a Golden Glove board member and international journalist, Scott Orlin, joining us for this conversation today. Welcome, Scott.
Thank you, Carol.
Scott, Hollywood has brought back this case that seems to be the center of everyone's attention now, regarding the state of Wisconsin versus Jeffrey Dahmer, commonly referred to as the monster case. Can you just share with me basically why you think that Netflix brought this particular topic back or resurrect this old case?
You know, it's really fascinating because on one hand, I think it's a subject matter that most people find abhorrent. If you were to ask them in their personal life, do you kind of want to deal with this or have conversations? They don't. But there's a safety factor, like going to a horror movie or watching these type of cases unfold on television, like Dateline will sometimes have it, where they get to have the comfort of their home, but kind of peek in and be a bit of a voyeur about what's going on.
Right. Well, I'm just trying to figure out why is it able to stay on the radar?
Well, I think there's always a fascination in something that's so larger than life. There's a paradox with this because obviously on one hand, you don't want to give this man any more fame or
of course not.
Interaction with the world than needs be. But if we don't learn from the past, that I think there are important lessons in watching this story. Not necessarily what was done right, but what was done wrong.
Right. Because
too many times we think it's like going to a game. I'm watching the World Series now, and batters, my God, they put their hand down 1 inch. They do it wrong. They have to watch the videotape, and then they understand this is why I need to do this, and then hopefully they'll become a better player and pick up. And I think the same thing applies with this.
Right, and you're absolutely right, because I see how the system failed those families with allowing this monster to go on a murder spree for 13 years. And it's like, what about the families that complain about their loved ones? What did the system do? What did the police do? Why didn't they ever, catch him before he goes on a 13-year murder spree? I mean, this case, I guess, piques the interest of people because it's like, okay, it's the same things are going on now with the system failing the people. Because as you know, Jeffrey Dahmer was out there murdering brown and black people, and it was atrocious. So I guess the interest is because nothing really has changed in the sense with the legal system. We see a broken system back then, and we still have the same broken system today.
Look at what just happened. I think it was yesterday with the Parkland shooter, the school, that they decided not to give the death penalty to the guy. And what I saw on social media was people were like, I don't want to say this person's name. Let's say the names of all his victims.
Right.
These are the people we should remember. Why are we remembering this guy? So
right.
I think that's kind of interesting.
Right. It's important to remember the names of the victims because you have the system that pretty much failed the victims. The same thing.
Well, I know there was a lot of pushback that's been going on because people feel very frustrated that the victims were not necessarily involved as much in the production of this and to get their story. And if anybody has watched the 10 episodes, there are several instances where the families are going, why should they be profiting? Why is like when his father was doing the book, or when Jeffrey was doing stuff in prison, he should not be profiting. He should not be making any money out of this.
Right, right. But it was amazing to me. You had people sending this monster money while he's in prison. You had people that were trying to capitalize off of his glasses and his whatever he had and whatever his grandmother had. And they are selling that as of today's date on eBay, which is crazy. And we don't ever want to make killers heroes. What we need to focus on, like you said, are the victims, and we also need to focus on the system that allowed this monster to get away with murder for 13 years.
I will say that in watching the show, kind of to picking up on one of your points, the most poignant episode for me was, and again, sadly I cannot remember some of the victims' names, but he was the deaf student, the deaf guy. And
I think that hit all.
That was so beautiful because you really got a chance to feel for somebody, and you got a chance to kind of explore this life of what was taken away.
Right, right. And the sad thing about it, after looking, of course, at the movie, is that this victim, this young man, he was looking for love. He was looking for a partner. He wasn't looking to get murdered. And that touched me. That really touched me.
But see, that's why I think in a strange way, watching these shows is beneficial.
Right.
Because it puts out a little warning thing. There's a naivete that some of us probably have as we venture out into the world.
Right.
And I don't think that we need to be jaded, but I think that we need to be aware. It's almost like coming to a cross signal and looking both ways.
Right.
That too many times we don't. We think, oh, we know what's coming. I don't hear a car. I'm going to walk across.
Right.
And we're kind of led to believe, well, this seems to be a nice person. This seems to be.
Right.
Not necessarily. People show you what they want to show you.
That's right. And that's why I started off saying all that glitters is not gold, because you had this monster out there, and then you had these poor victims that, their idea of getting to know someone, and his idea was he's planning to kill them and eat them and do God knows whatever else he did to them that never came to life. But all we know is what he did was terrible, and everything that came out that Jeffrey, I'm not going to call his name, that this monster did, was atrocious. What angered me the most about the monster story is how the judge was so lenient with him. He said he didn't want to ruin his life. When this man has been charged with sexually assault of a young man, and he later comes in and murders his brother. But at the hearing, the sexual assault hearing, the judge basically is like just slapping him on the wrist and saying, okay, I'm not going to ruin your life. So that in itself shows that the system needs to change. Because we have the same thing back then, we're having the same thing now. Only select number of people are allowed to be free or not go to prison or jail, while other people have to go to prison or jail. It's a very selective method that's going on with the legal system. And I don't call it the justice system, because justice is only good as the people that you put in place or have in office.
Well, it seems fascinating, too, that if you kind of dissect it, it's thinking, how does the judge know the future path of this person? If they've just been accused of a sexual assault, right. I think, hey, I'm going to let you off because I think you have promise. Right. To me, what you just did showed that maybe you don't have promise, that there's a little red flag. But again, we just saw it recently, a couple of years ago, was that incident in Northern California where I think it was a college student, where he was an attempted rape or an actual rape, and the judge, because he was a lacrosse player, some sports player, he thought, oh, no, you have such potential that, you can kind of, I see a future for you, so I'm going to be lenient on you. And I thought, well, you're not being lenient on the victim of the poor girl that just went through this horrific, violent act. Right.
And see, that's why you can't call it a justice system when you have people like that that's choosing who's going to go to jail and who's not, but they only choosing certain people to do that. And we saw that in this monster case. Had the judge sentenced him or found him guilty and sentenced him, the judge may have saved a lot more lives.
I love how you talked about the differential between justice and legal,
Oh,
because
yeah.
so many times, and I've heard it said that when people are about to have a case or to take something, they go, well, it depends which judge I get. So it's like, well, it shouldn't make a difference because the law is the law. So it shouldn't make, who cares who is actually interpreting it, because he should follow the rules of that. But it's up to that individual,
Right.
like I just said, to interpret.
Right,
The
to
law.
interpret the law. It's an individual thing, and you're right. Judges should follow the law. But sometimes some of them don't, and sometimes some of them do. And I have to give credit to those that are trying to make it a justice system, that's trying to, dish out fairness to everyone. But in this monster case, that didn't happen. So I'm wondering, whether or not that particular judge was remorseful about what he did, because he should be, because he could have saved the lives of other people had he just convicted him, found him guilty, sentenced him to prison rather than giving him a slap on the wrist.
Well, that's what I think that so many times when you watch a project like this, because you look at the police had so many opportunities.
Yeah.
When Jeffrey, the scene in the car where he has the trash bags in the back seat, and had the policeman who stopped him actually did a search to see what was
And that
going
was
on
early on.
at the very beginning, and he would have discovered the severed body, and he didn't do anything. He goes, "Wow, you're so young. You have career potential.
Right.
I'm going to let you off."
But how many times are, I guess, other people, when I say other people, I mean black and brown people, not given that opportunity? They're just not given that opportunity. And it just seems like when I say they, I mean, see, the system starts with the police and the criminal justice system. It starts when you get stopped, arrested, sent to the DA's office. They decide that they're going to charge you with a crime, and then, you go to court, and the system is rolling at this point. In the monster case, he never, up until after he had basically murdered a few people, that he got charged with sexually assaulting a person. And to me, that just blew my mind. I'm like, well, why is this particular man being allowed to have all these opportunities, and he goes on a murder spree?
I'll share with you a story that I had nothing to do with, but I remember I came home once to my house, and there was an aroma that literally I did not want to venture further into my house, discovering there was a dead possum in my basement, and it basically was rotting away. But that odor was so prevalent. So when we have the experience of Glenda, the next door neighbor, talking about this powerful aroma, it's not something, something was deteriorated. Something was
it wasn't
going
just,
on there.
It wasn't just pork chops riding in the refrigerator.
It wasn't bad meat or something. It was something going on. And that was another instance, too, where the police, whether they didn't want to hear it or they didn't want to understand it, I'm not sure.
But you would think that law enforcement are trained to know the different smells, because from my understanding, there is a very distinctive smell regarding the death of a human being versus a possum or bad meat, bad pork chops that he kept telling people they sent him some bad pork chops or some bad meat. You would have thought law enforcement would have been able to distinguish that particular odor. And that brings me back up when you mentioned, speaking of aroma, with the next door neighbor, Glenda. That angers me too, because they didn't even take the word of this woman saying something is wrong with my next door neighbor. Bad things are going on. I can feel it. You all need to investigate. They pretty much just kind of blew her aside. And they blew her aside because of the neighborhood she lived in, because she was a black woman, and they just didn't really at that particular time, poor people didn't matter. So that's why the monster was able, in fact, he strategically placed himself in that neighborhood, in a disadvantaged neighborhood, so that he could prey on people. And, we can sit here and talk about this all day, but it still goes back to the system failing the victims.
I can only fathom what the outcry must have been like with these families at the time. Now in some instances it's may have been the person just disappeared, or they weren't sure where they went because there were no bodies for them to kind of,
That just wrote them off as missing people.
Yeah, of what to do. But you realize too is where the system again failed is. Because we watch Law and Order and we see these crime shows where this detective, wait a minute, I'm starting to see a pattern here.
Right.
And you realize, didn't anybody there see a pattern? Wasn't there something that, wait a minute, why are all these people, after 3 or 4,
right?
You start
and
to
in the
notice
same
something.
area, it's not like he moved around. You would think that they would recognize that there's a pattern here. We have all these missing people. Something is wrong.
But the pattern, like you said, involved people of color, involved LGBTQ community, people that are not only marginalized but overlooked.
Right.
And that why pay more attention to them than we have to, which is so sad,
right,
frustrating,
right,
and makes one angry.
Right. And we see that today. We see that today with all the police killings. In fact, I do what I do for a living, representing families that have been, killed by the police because they don't value black and brown people's lives or poor people's lives. And that's what we basically saw in the monster case.
But I want to follow up on what you said, because I thought it was great with the next door neighbor, which technically, if you peel back the layers, Glenda was not the next door neighbor. She actually lived across the street.
Okay.
There's an amalgamation of characters. There was another woman who did live next door.
Okay.
Who was kind of doing this. But to me, it's the power of one. That was the beauty. When you see that with Niecy Nash, who I have to say I love as an actor, I did not know that was her when I was first watching the first 2 episodes.
She did
an
amazing
someone goes,
job.
Wasn't Niecy Nash? I go, which one is she? And it's like, that was. And so bravo to her for this immersion in a character. But that to me is what needs to be celebrated, is the power of one. She did not give up. She was relentless.
Right.
And that sometimes it is those people that need to be celebrated.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And unfortunately, I don't know if she was. I know they were trying to set up a park after they tore the building down that she was facilitating, but I don't know if it ever came to fruition.
Well, I think, too, some communities, they do not want to remember. That is what is fascinating to me about history. And that's what, again, I think is a positive about this, is sometimes we as a society are so susceptible to forgetting that when you watch, whether it's documentation of atrocities during war or with civil rights cases or with just human versus human, we forget what people are capable of doing. And that these memories, bringing people back, going, wow, how could we let that happen? And as you said, you have to be careful. We didn't just let it happen. We are continuing to let it happen. So it is up to us to be the Glendas in our world and our community, to point things out and to say, hey, what is this? Which, people were doing a lot, like especially after 9/11, where people report a suspicious package. Well, then it got so crazy that it went the other degree, the New York case of, the jogger and the woman who was bird watching.
Oh, my
God.
God.
Why was he jogging in Central Park? But that's what people do.
Right. It went kind of left and still going a little left. But I guess I'm curious. Do you know if there would be any legal recourse or any type of restitution for the families as it relates to what he did for this? I know the statute of limitations definitely have run for them to take any type of recourse.
Well, I don't. Again, I could be totally wrong, so I'm not really sure about this. But I don't think anybody in the Dahmer family is making any financial gain out of this.
Right.
Whether it's any type of exploration that people make, like when they just did the Marilyn Monroe, the blonde. I don't think her family gets
Right.
anything using her image. I think there's public record in which they tap into. But there should be some type of acknowledgement, which I think there was at the very end about, which I think Ryan Murphy, who put this together, and I think he handled it very sensitively with some of these families, about what to do. I can only fathom, though, if I was one of the families, do I want this told again? Do I want this? Because you have to go through the pain.
Right. You keep having to relive.
Right. But hopefully,
very
as I said
painful.
earlier, it's that the next generation sees what is potentially out there, and maybe it will cause that one person to pause for a second before they just blindly
Right.
accept an invitation to somebody.
Right. Hopefully, we all have learned. We're still learning, and we unfortunately had to learn from this monster about our system. But
doesn't it
that's what
scare you
is.
how many other monsters must be out there that we just don't know about?
Yeah, it definitely scares me.
Mm-hmm.
It scares me. There was a scenario down in Louisiana. But I won't relive that. It's because it happened to a very close friend. It was a situation almost like this. But there was a serial killer loose in Louisiana called Derek Todd Lee, and I really hated to bring his name up, but he was on the loose like that. But he got caught, and hopefully he's riding in prison today. But I tell you, this monster case, everyone from, I flew from Louisiana to California, and everyone's talking about it. I overheard conversations at the airport with people talking about it. And just yesterday, I was on the elevator someplace, and they were talking about whether or not they were going to continue to watch what's going on with that series.
First of all, I'm a little disheartened right now to know that you flew in from Louisiana and you don't have beignets here for your guests.
Oh, you
but
should
that's just another
tell
story.
me.
That we'll get
Forgive
into
me.
that on another podcast.
Forgive me, because actually I flew in from New Orleans to have the best
It
beignets.
gets worse. It gets worse.
It gets worse, huh? Next time I will remember. that. But do you think that the Dahmer Netflix series will be nominated?
I definitely think there's going to be critical attention paid to it. There's a myriad of different organizations, from the Emmys to the Golden Globes, as we mentioned, to other, the Screen Actors Guild, to pay attention. And you have to look at, especially some of the performances. We mentioned Niecy Nash, who was so incredibly brilliant at what she did, and Evan Peters.
Yeah.
There was such a subtlety to that performance. I mean, I'm such a great admirer of his work because he's fearless as an actor. I think if you watch the stuff he's done, whether it was American Horror Story or Mayor of Easttown, that he's doing, there's a subtlety to what he does. A lot of people are grand with their gestures, and he's very internal.
Very
And
creative.
To me, it's very riveting. And that's where you saw the power of this monster, in the
Wow.
subtlety.
You're
I
right.
think if they would have shown a lot of the violence, if they would have shown the madness of that, it probably could have been dismissed a lot more. It was scarier to watch because this is your next door neighbor.
Right. And he was so, what's the word for it? So calm and cool and friendly, but yet very cynical and destructive and
Well, look at toward the end, the episode where and again, I had to go back and Google some of this stuff, like the Gacy, and I was like, I remember the name, but I don't remember the details, and the parallel of what was going on, but the cold-heartedness of what people do, the destruction, and it's like, what's their internal turmoil? Where does this come from?
Right.
To be able to do something like that to another person? Or even an animal, which I get very protective of as well.
Right.
It's fascinating to me. I think we need to examine them and pay attention to them. But like you said, I do not think we need to glorify them.
Never glorify them. And I guess another thing that's intriguing with this case is that the parents of the monster. Well, the dad, he just kept, just kept encouraging him, to dissect animals. And it's kind of like, you don't know if that thought was put in his mind when he was doing his taxidermy stuff, or he was just a little child that was
Well, it started the very first episode where the mother, while in her pregnancy, was taking all that medication, and
Right.
you're thinking, oh my God, nowadays, you don't even want to have,
Right.
rum candy because the alcohol content of that could somehow affect the bloodstream.
Right,
So,
right.
fathom what happened back in the 40s and 50s and the 60s of what they allowed women to intake.
Mm-hmm.
Not that that's a defense, I think, to sit there and say, oh, it's because of the medication. I think we can all agree there are bad seeds.
Yeah. And
It's
that
like
was
why
a
there are
bad
rabid
seed.
dogs. There's some dogs that are great
Right.
and others.
And he was just a very, very bad seed that the dad did not want to acknowledge at all. At all.
But it must be tough for a parent to have to look at your child and know
Oh, they know.
what they just did and to
Right.
accept that. But, you see other parents or how many times where kids have turned in their parents where they discovered it. And who was it? Was it the bomber, the Unabomber? His brother turned him in. Mm-hmm. That sometimes family has to be the one that steps up because they have a little more information than everybody else has.
Right, right. And I believe the monster dad had a lot of information, but he was in total denial about the propensities that his son had and was what he was doing. So I tell you, as we move forward, lesson well learned. It was a great series, and in real life, hopefully we all can apply some of the things that we learned, and that is to basically stay on the people that you put in office, to make sure they are held accountable, and to make sure they are treating everyone fair and not a certain demographic. So what do you think?
Well, no, as you say that, it's so funny. I remember years ago, I got a traffic citation, and I went and I was going to oppose it because I thought, well, this wasn't right. It's not what they said. And I went up there and I had photo evidence and all this other stuff. And the officer was present, said this is what he did. And so I stood up. Well, I have evidence. He goes, I'm not interested. Guilty.
Wow.
So it didn't even matter. And I
Right.
thought, wow, okay. And I was a few years younger. It didn't even matter. In other words, it was the word of this person was more
Versus
valuable than mine. And I
that's
didn't even have a
right.
chance to present evidence to support
Right.
where I was coming from.
And-
So I looked at, oh my God, this is just small little microcosm of where it is. What happens if there's a real serious thing out there?
Right, right. And that right there shows you where the mentality of this judge state of mind, and basically you can probably see a pattern of his rulings in favor of the police. So yeah, this particular case just reopened a lot of I guess a lot of things that's going on in this country today. Well, the great thing about this case is that the monster got 999 years, and I think he only got to live after he got convicted of a couple of years before he was taken out in prison. And the bad thing is that the police officers who did not do their job, who basically turned a blind eye to everything that he did, they got celebrated. And I think even in the series, it showed them harassing the family, the Asian family that Jeffrey, that the monster, I'll just call his name, that the monster had sexually assaulted one of their children and had actually killed the other child. The series showed that the police were the ones that were telling them, making all these racial slurs and anti-Asian comments to go back where you came from. They got celebrated.
And they got back pay
Worse.
for the time when they were, put on suspension. And then I think one of them again, I'm trying to remember statistically, went on to be elected like chief of the police of
Oh my
of the
God.
area too.
Oh my God.
That's one of the frustrating things. Look, I think there's ask anybody, God forbid there's an emergency, you want the police around. That
Yeah.
we need the police. I think they're an
Yeah.
incredibly important entity. But as with any organization or any system, sometimes people abuse the power that they're given. And it's frustratingly, we kind of put a blanket over everything. And I think there's amazing men and women out there as awesome police people doing it.
Right, I
And,
agree.
I have personally experienced in the past year and a half what happens when 2 or 3 people do something bad and they throw a blanket over everybody and say, well, you're all this. And it's like, well, no, it's not. But what it does is give you pause to say, okay, what made them think that? How can I go and try and change the impression? And I would hope that maybe this could be a cause that people would want to go out there and help reform.
Right. Well, what about, here we are 30 years later, and people are saying defund the police because of bad apples getting celebrated.
Terrible wording, because I don't think defunding is what we should be doing. Restructuring, I think, is a much better word to use, because like I said before, I believe there's an importance to a police department, a fire department, and for public safety. But if there's abuses in the system, then that needs to be restructured.
Right, and I agree. Well, Scott, thank you so much for joining us today. I tell you, I think we had a great conversation, and hopefully we were able to put a little nuggets of out there to help people think about and at least voice their opinion if they see things that they don't feel comfortable with, or bad things happening, that they will continue to be relentless like Miss Glenda was in the monster case, and hopefully it'll be a better world.
Well, Carol, I appreciate. Thank you for letting me come in here and have a conversation, which I'm a huge advocate of. I think that sometimes if we sit down and have conversations with people, we
Right.
can solve a lot of problems.
And I
But
agree.
sometimes people don't want to talk.
I know, unfortunately, and we end up back in the same, I guess, dog chasing tail situations. But
Or maybe they want to talk, they just don't want to listen. I think part of having a conversation is talking and listening.
I agree. Well, thank you for joining us today. Remember to check out my website at carolpowelllaw.com, and remember, knowledge is power, and that your voice has power.